بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد نبي الرحمة وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, we're at lesson 5 of our lessons on the essentials of worship, in which we're looking at Imam Shurunbulali's text on the Ascent to Felicity, looking at the section on worship, starting with purification. So we spent some time in the previous lessons looking at wudu. Okay? And wudu is the most common of our ritual acts of purification. Right? We do wudu all the time. And the act of wudu serves also as a reminder of the need to purify our limbs from its contraventions, right? Because just as one purifies them from ritual impurity, one strives to purify them from the tangible, from the real impurity of sin and the impurity of being heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we saw that wudu has certain obligatory acts. What are the obligatory acts of wudu? And what do you do with the head? Yeah. So the obligatory acts of wudu are those mentioned in the verse of purification from Surah Al-Imran, Surah Ma'idah, Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 6, the 5th surah, verse 6. O you believe, if you stand to pray, wash your faces, meaning completely, wash your arms up to and including the elbows, wipe your heads, and we saw how that entails wiping a quarter of the head, and wash your feet up to and including the ankles. So those are the obligatory acts of wudu. And we looked at the sunnahs of wudu and how the emphasized sunnahs of wudu should not be omitted. We also saw what things invalidate wudu. And the invalidation of wudu revolves around one meaning. What is that one meaning? Go ahead. I can't hear. The exiting of filth. Right? That is the legal cause, the illah, for the nullification of wudu. Now this exiting of filth, we saw, can be considered of two types. What were they? Actual and effective. Actual, when filth comes out. Okay. And what is effective exiting of filth? Or what is considered like effective exiting of filth? Go ahead. Yeah, it is those situations where it is quite likely that the exiting of filth would have taken place, but one would be unaware of it, such as sleep, loss of consciousness, etc. And then, in terms of the nullification of wudu, there's two types of exiting of filth. And the consideration differs between them. What are the two types of exiting of filth that we consider? Go ahead. Yeah, so exiting of filth from the private parts and exiting of filth from other than the private parts. With respect to filth that comes out from the private parts, what is the consideration?
Exiting and emerging.
Yeah, it's the mere exiting, that it emerges, that it appears on the surface. And from other than the private parts, it needs to not only exit, but also to flow. And we saw what relates to that. When does sleep invalidate wudu? Yeah. Yeah. So you're considered asleep rather than drowsy when you can no longer hear most of what's around you. Anything less than that would be considered drowsiness, but it is not sleep or beyond, right? And if you're not seated, right? If the rear is seated, then even if you sleep for a long time, it does not break wudu. Then, the Imam Shurunbulali moves on to the less common of the acts of ritual purification, which is ghusl. Right? And ghusl refers to it is the complete washing. That's what ghusl is. Right? It's the complete washing. Right? So, and the state that requires complete washing, right, is referred to in the Quran. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُوبًا فَاتَّهَّرُوا. And if you're in a state of janaba, of major ritual impurity, then purify yourselves thoroughly and completely. From the same verse of purification. And a number of you, Jazakumullah khair, submitted the assignment suggested on the verse, and we'll be getting back to you with feedback on that, inshallah. The ghusl has obligatory acts, it has sunnah acts, it has certain adab, certain proper manners, and then there's rulings related to it. When is it required? When is it sunnah? When is it recommended? So he tells us straight away, وَفُرُوضُ الْغُسْلِ ثَلَاثَةً. The obligatory acts of the ritual bath, the ghusl, are three. الْمَضْمَضَةُ وَالْإِسْتِنْشَاقُ, washing the mouth and washing the nose. وَغَسْلُ مَا أَمْكَنَ مِنْ سَائِرِ الْجَسَدِ بِلَا عُسْرٍ وَمَشَقَّةٍ. Right? So washing the mouth, washing the nose, and washing all that is possible to wash of the outer body without hardship and without difficulty. And this is what's entailed by wash yourselves thoroughly and completely. Wash yourselves thoroughly and completely from the Quran. Because it said wash yourselves completely, you'd wash the outer body. It said فَطَّهَّرُوا, wash yourself thoroughly, then those things that could be part of washing are part of the washing. And those are the mouth and the nose. And also parts of the body that require attention, right? Your belly button, for example, or if you have like multi-layered skin anywhere and you have to wash underneath it, for example. So these three are obligatory. Washing the mouth means to wash the mouth completely. To wash the mouth completely. Washing the nose, istinshaq, madmada and istinshaq. Madmada is to swirl water in your mouth. If you make the sound mad, 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 right? And they say istanshaqa is a sound of taking that in. It's istanshaqa, right? So you breathe in water, so to speak. And that's what's mentioned in the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ in describing his ghusl. But they sometimes, for legal definition, they say al-madmada ghaslul fam. Madmada is washing the complete mouth, right? Washing the complete mouth, which is till the back of the mouth. So if you take water into your mouth, right, then the water will get around the whole mouth. To ensure that, one, there's a number of sunnahs, as we'll see, of for example, leaning backward, making sure water gets to the back of the mouth, to gargle, etc. Those are extra, those are sunnahs, and we'll see them. But the obligation is to wash the mouth. If you take water into the mouth, it'll cover the mouth. Washing the nose, يعني المضمضة أي غسل ملان من الأنف. It is to wash the soft part of the nose. And again, if you take some water and you breathe it into your nose, you can assume that it gets to that area. And washing all that is possible to wash of the outer body without hardship or difficulty. Right? Rubbing is not a requirement. Rubbing is not a requirement. We'll see it is a sunnah, just as in wudu. But washing the whole body from head to toe is a requirement. So if we look at some of the legal issues that arise, why is washing mouth and nose obligatory? Because of the divine command to wash thoroughly and completely. And this is attested to by the sunnah. Right? This is attested to by the sunnah, but not, strictly speaking, established by the sunnah. Right? The sunnah ghusl of the Prophet ﷺ describes his washing his mouth and nose, etc. But that would establish that it's a praiseworthy matter to do. Right? Following the sunnah is sunnah. Right? The sunnah itself does not establish obligation, and it's actually a math in usul al-fiqh. It's a principle that obligation is established by a command, not by an action. So an action, right, they say dilalatul qawl, legally, they say dilalatul qawl aqwa min dilalatil fi'l. The indication of words is stronger than the indication of an action, legally. Right? Spiritually and socially, it's the other way around perhaps, but legally, if the Prophet ﷺ says it, you do it. Right? And Allah's subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, the command of the Prophet ﷺ, this establishes obligation, or establishes a duty. If it's decisively established, it will be obligatory. If it's established, but not quite decisively, it's dhanni, it could establish what's wajib. But a command establishes, by the default of the command is that it establishes obligation. Whereas an action, it does not establish obligation, even though we have been commanded to follow the Prophet ﷺ. Right? But that command is general. Right? How you follow him, that command, right? It has levels of application. It has a theological implication, which is you must accept that his guidance is to be followed, right? Broadly, right? And that's actually the definition of faith. What is faith? Al-Iman tasdiqu ma ja'a bihi Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mimma ulima min ad-din bid-darura. What is faith? It is to confirm as true that which the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came with. Okay? So that's one aspect of following. You accept that this is the way to be followed. Right? If you accept that, you're a believer. then you accept to follow the Prophet ﷺ in his, in matters of action, but at the levels of emphasis, because not everything is at the same level of emphasis. And the command is what establishes obligation, right? The command is what establishes obligation. But that command establishes obligation unless the command is understood to the contrary. Unless the command is understood to the contrary. For example, which is why interestingly, there's a hadith that says, غُسْلُ الْجُمُعَةِ وَاجِبٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُحْتَلِمٍ. The ghusl for Friday is wajib, is a duty for every adult person. That's what the Prophet ﷺ, he said it's wajib. What is the legal ruling of ghusl for Friday? It's sunnah. It's an emphasized sunnah. Some say it's recommended. There's, it's a real small minority who said it's wajib. Why? For a number of reasons. One is because that's not the only text. There are other texts. So how do you piece them together? Okay. See, one of the texts is interesting. It's one of the grammatical texts. Right? Right? That the Prophet said, "Man ightasala al-jum'ati fabiha wa ni'mat." And they love that because that goes into, there's grammatical issues with that. Right? Tells you what kind of what kind of word ni'mah is. It takes a ta at the end. Right? But then he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever does ghusl for Friday, then that is of great worth and how good it is. And whoever, sorry, it's the other way. When tawadda lil Jumu'ah, whoever makes wudu for Jumu'ah, they have done something that is good and blessed. And whoever makes ghusl, that is superior. Right? And that hadith establishes the superiority of ghusl. But you wouldn't say that wudu is good if by making wudu rather than ghusl, you've committed a sin. Right? So, and there's a number of other texts that would confirm that. Right? So, the obligation is not established, number one, by action alone. So just if the Prophet ﷺ did something, it does not establish obligation. It would establish that this is something he did. That's the first thing established. That he did it, if it's established. Then you have to see, right, that at what level are we to follow him in that? Is it at the level of encouragement, emphasis, or duty? Or is this something, and there's an exception clause which is, or is this particular to him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? So it's if established from him, right? Many questions. Is this encouraged? Is it emphasized? Or is it incumbent? So one has to look at all supporting considerations. Or is this from his khasa'is, from the things that are unique to him? Right? So, this is why we must take hadith very seriously, but we don't take it simplistically either. We don't take it simplistically either. So just because a hadith said that ghusl is incumbent does not necessarily mean it's obligatory. And sometimes there's a context, because there's actually some of the Sahaba explained, because initially the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ was quite small. And the Sahaba, they'd migrated from Mecca, especially the Muhajirin, they migrated without their wealth. And even the Ansar, what wealth they had, they supported the Muhajirin with it, and they split it with them. And there's a lot of things to do. So they gave their wealth openly. وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ. And they preferred others to themselves, both other individuals and the public interest over themselves, even if what they had was insufficient. So they would typically have one, sometimes two items of clothing. And it was coarse, and in the heat, they would come to the masjid and it would smell. So other people started finding it difficult, especially on Friday where you'd be there for quite a while because there's the khutbah and the emphasis of devotion before and after. And the Prophet ﷺ was sensitive to smells. And he did not object. So the command came. But when matters became more expansive and so on, Ibn Abbas and others explain that the emphasis went from being a duty, that look, for the public interest, take a shower, right, to being a matter of strong encouragement. But washing mouth and nose is understood from the Quranic verse. And inshallah, when we look at usul al-fiqh, we will see that in the Hanafi school they're very, very serious about the indications, how that the basis is that the Quran is decisive. It is muhaymin. Right? It is the governing criterion over everything else. Right? And so the basis is that it's in the default of its indications is that they're decisive. And everything is understood in the light of that. That's the Hanafi approach. So that's the first point. The second point is, really you can reduce ghusl down to one ruling, which is that for ghusl to be valid, you must wash completely. For ghusl to be valid, you must wash completely. That's it. Including mouth and nose therein. That's it. And that also goes back to the indication of the Quran, right? In that the command to purify is ascribed to the complete body. Because if you are in major ritual impurity, then purify yourselves. What do you purify? There's nothing to purify of yourself except your body. Right? Right? Because ritual impurity affects your body. It doesn't affect your clothing or anything else. That's obvious. So the ruling of purifying completely is ascribed to the body, so that indication is taken as is. You wash completely. And the duty to wash completely is broadly concurred upon. Right? The distinguishing opinion of the Hanafis is the obligation to wash mouth and nose, where some of the other schools say that that is a sunnah. Why would the intention not be obligatory? Why would the intention not be obligatory? Go ahead. Because it's not specified there. It's if you are in kuntum junuban fattaharu. If you are in major ritual impurity, janaba, then wash yourselves thoroughly and completely. So the purity is linked with washing completely. If you wash completely, you fulfill the condition. That's it. If, then. Right? So the Hanafis take that very, very seriously. Right? And purification is something that relates to the consequence of an action. Right? The consequence of an act. of using water. And then the Hanafis would also argue, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described water as being purifying by the way Allah has made it. Right? Allah has sent down for you water from the skies, لِيُطَهِّرَكُمْ بِهِ, for Him to purify you through it. And we looked at, there's a spiritual aspect to that as well. And ghusl too, what kind of act of worship is it? Is it sought in itself? No, right? It is a means. Right? So means are, they say, العبرة في الشروط والوسائل حصولها لا تحصيلها. What is sought in means, in conditions and means, is fulfilling them, not in seeking them. Okay. So the condition for you to go out in public is that your awra be clothed, for example. Do you have to intend, I hereby am leaving my house not in a state of legal nakedness? No. As long as it's fulfilled, it's fine. The condition has to be met, it does not have to be sought. The condition has to be met, it does not have to be sought. And that applies across the board. If you buy and sell, a condition for a valid offer is that it has to be, the other person has to, if it's verbal, if it's uttered, the other person has to hear it. For example, if it's verbalized, there's many ways it can be fulfilled, but it was said, I said it quietly. So I bid first. I didn't hear it. Right? But to say it, do you have to intend it? Deliberately. I am now making myself heard to Sister Tariqa that I sell you my iPad. No, it just has to be met. Do you have to intend to face the Qibla? No, you just have to be facing it, etc. So, intention is not obligatory here, like it's not obligatory in wudu, but it is a condition for reward. So, to make the ghusl an act of worship, one pauses before, one gathers the intention, and tries to magnify it, because it is an act of worship. And there's an important principle in the Sharia that لِلْوَسَائِلِ حُكْمُ الْغَايَاتِ, that means take the ruling of ends. لِلْوَسَائِلِ حُكْمُ الْغَايَاتِ. So, which has many legal implications. Okay? That why you're rewarded for wudu? Because this is a means to prayer. And prayer is a means of closeness to Allah, etc. So this is the key, right? And the Prophet ﷺ described purity as being the key, the miftah to the prayer. Okay? So it is of consequence. But if it's a means to an act of being present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc., then what applies to the end should apply to the means as well. Which is why many scholars like Imam Ahmad Zarruq and others said, the key to presence of heart in prayer begins with presence of heart in wudu. And even before that, he said, it's for your heart to be gathered when you go to the toilet before you take a bath. Right? So you have that sense of spiritual consciousness. You don't just go, okay, I got to use a toilet, and then I have to take a bath, and I have to do this and that, and okay, oh, now I have to pray. Okay? If you're heedless in all the steps leading to the prayer, then heedlessness should be likely in the prayer. But if you had a sense of consciousness that I'm using the washroom so that I can begin getting ready for the prayer, to seek closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. And you enter the toilet with the adab of entering the toilet for the sake of Allah. So you have consciousness from there, you have consciousness in your ghusl and after the ghusl, when you clothe yourself. Right? So you're conscious through all of that, then you get to the prayer. Be kind of strange that you're conscious before the prayer and suddenly you're not conscious in the prayer. That's not very likely. Okay? So that's also from للوسائل حكم الغايات, that means take the rulings of ends. So they're not the point, but ignoring them misses the point. So what are the sunnahs of ghusl? He mentions وَمِن سُنَنِهِ, from from the sunnahs of ghusl. And again, this min is للتبعيض. This is the partitive min amongst the sunnahs of ghusl, because there are many. There are many sunnahs, but the emphasized ones have been mentioned here broadly. Right? So he mentions 6 sunnahs, and you could number them differently. The first is the intention, an-niyyah. And what's the definition of intention? What's the definition of intention? Go ahead. Yeah, so in the Arabic language, it is directing oneself to an action. And that's a broad definition, right? So, and you can say that about something, you can say, I intend to visit my parents tomorrow, right? Would that be a true thing to say? Is that a legal intention? Why? Yeah. So linguistically, the intention is the resolve to do something. But what is the legal sense of intention? Yeah. So it is the firm resolve, right? The firm resolve to do an action and to draw closer to Allah at the beginning of the action. Okay? So legally the intention is the resolve that is connected with the action, the resolve that precedes the action. Right? So the fact that tomorrow I'm visiting my parents, that's a broad that's broadly intended, but that's not legal intention. The legal intention is it precedes the action. What moved you to do the action? That's a legal cause. Right? So if you're in court and you're trying to determine culpability, you say, okay, why did you do that then? Right? Although legally we judge by the outward, that's a separate matter. So the intention is the resolve to perform an action and to draw close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the beginning of the action. It is inevitable that the resolve to do the action would be there if you did the action. Right? It is assumed to be present. But you magnify the intention, bringing in the meanings of drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You intend to follow the sunnah, to act, to fulfill what is entailed by your slavehood and Allah's lordship, etc. And there's numerous meanings of gathering one's resolve there. And this is what gives substance to your action. Then, so that's at the beginning of the action. وَغَسْلُ يَدَيْهِ إِلَى رُزْغَيْهِ, and washing your hands up to and including the wrists at the beginning. Because you're going to use your hands for ghusl. So you clean, you purify the means, right, before pursuit. وَغَسْلُ فَرْجِهِ, and to wash one's private parts. Even if you did not use the toilet. Even if you did not use the toilet. And then washing away any filth on one's body. وَنَجَاسَةٍ بِبَدَنِهِ أي وَغَسْلُ نَجَاسَةٍ بِبَدَنِهِ, and to wash away any filth on one's body, if there is any there. And the wisdom in that is that if there was filth there already, if there's filth there and then you shower, you might start getting doubts. Did it spread? Is there some stuck between my toes? Whatever. No, so this dispels any doubts. But this is sunnah. And then to perform, and then وَتَقْدِيمُ الْوُضُوء, and then to perform a complete wudu before the ghusl. And some of the texts they say وَتَقْدِيمُ الْوُضُوء بِسُنَنِهِ, with all its sunnahs, which would include washing your hands again. Okay? Because you washed your hands before washing your private parts. And that's one of the sunnahs that's often neglected, that before you use the toilet, it's from the sunnah broadly to wash your hands. Okay? And the wisdoms in that are obvious. So performing a wudu before it. And then pouring water over one's entire body. ثم يفيض الماء على بدنه بادئا برأسه. Then one pours water over one's entire body, beginning with one's head. Right? So that's all there is to ghusl. But you can look at the ghusl in two parts. Most of the effort of ghusl, in terms of the sunnah, precedes the ghusl itself. Okay? Before the ghusl itself. You begin with intention and washing your hands. And here is the assumption that you're clothed or unclothed. Clothed. Then you wash your private parts and wash away any filth. Are you clothed or unclothed? Now I'm not asking are you clothed or unclothed right now. I'm asking like if in this situation. Well, a whole bunch of people mumbled, so I'm like confused. Someone raised their hands. Go ahead. Well, that'd be kind of complicated to wash oneself while clothed. It's theoretically possible, but practically unlikely. You're only partially uncovered. You would only be partially uncovered. Right? So that's one of the wisdoms of these actions before ghusl. Right? So you wash your private parts, right? Uncovering to the extent needed. And you wash away any filth. Then you make a complete wudu with its sunnahs. Where would you perform this complete wudu? I mean, if you imagine a modern washroom, you're at the sink, you're not in the tub, right? Although you could do it wherever, but are you covered here or uncovered? Covered, right? But now you've already washed your private parts. You've washed away any filth, and you've washed major limbs, the face, the arms, the feet. You've wiped your head, right? You've washed mouth and nose already. Okay? So what happens? So now when you do uncover for the ghusl, how long will you be uncovered for? A relatively shorter amount of time. And that's one of the broad sunnahs of the deen, is that uncovering is an exception. So it remains exceptional and is reduced in extent. And then you wash your entire body 3 complete times, pouring water from the head. Now, if we look at the description of the ghusl of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's a number of main descriptions of his ghusl sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 2 of the main ones are the hadith of Sayyidah Aisha and the hadith of Sayyidah Maymuna, 2 of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, radiyallahu ta'ala anhun, which describe each of these actions. And when they describe the action of the Prophet ﷺ, right, what does the word kana signify? What does the word kana signify? Yeah, kana in this kind of context describes the habit. He used to, right? As opposed to he did, right? That he did it once, right? But he used to. This is describing his habit, right? His usual practice. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم سيدة عائشة رضي الله عنها relates كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا اغتسل من الجنابة يبدأ فيغسل يديه. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, when he wanted to take a ritual bath, make ghusl from ritual impurity, he would begin by washing his hands. ثم يفرغ بيمينه على شماله. Then he would pour water using his right hand on his left. فيغسل فرجه. And he would wash his private parts. And Sayyidah Aisha is a faqih. She notices subtleties. Right? So even here she slips in that he uses left hand to wash his private parts. Right? So she slipped that in. Okay? ثم يتوضأ. Then he performed wudu. Right? Meaning completely. ثم يأخذ الماء. Then he would take some water. And now this is a neglected sunnah. So he'd pour water over himself, but he'd do something first. Right? And Sayyidah Aisha pointed this out, and this is often neglected. Because this is from washing the face, from washing the head. But he used to do something, and these are subtleties from the sunnah, before he poured water over his head. And even if you look at not using water unnecessarily. The wudu would take care of washing the feet. And the feet take time. Right? The private parts take attention, but they're dealt with separately. So every area that requires extra effort, take care of. Now, before pouring water over his head, what would he do? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ثم يأخذ الماء. Then he would take some water. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فيدخل أصابعه في أصول الشعر. And he would enter his fingers into the roots of his hair. So take some wetted hand, and he would rub his hair. So now what's happened? If the water has reached the roots of your hair, then you pour some water, that water is going to flow much more quickly. So how much water do you need to use? Significantly less. Okay. Which is telling us an underlying value, right? That water is a blessing from Allah. That one uses it with moderation. Okay. Now, the emphasized sunnah is the Prophet used to pour from the top and you wash down. But this is a nuance and adab, and the great Syrian hadith scholar and faqih Shaykh Nuruddin Itr, in his commentary on Bulugh al-Maram, points out that this is often a neglected adab or recommended act. Right? So this is a point of benefit. And say to Aisha, so someone's taking a shower, like, okay, go ahead, tell me when you're done, tell me what you did. But she observed even the subtlest of things. As the Sahaba took the sunnah very, very seriously. Right? Because they say that the true lover, they say فَالْفَتَى مَنْ أَخَذَتْهُ جُمْلَةً لَلَّذِي تَأْخُذُهُ شَيْئًا فَشَيْءٍ. The virtuous one is the one whom the beloved takes completely. لَلَّذِي تَأْخُذُهُ شَيْئًا فَشَيْءٍ. Not the one who it just takes bit by bit. Right? So the Sahaba gave themselves completely to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So she noticed each of these things, right? Then he would take, water 3 times and pouring it over his head. ثلاث حفنات, like 3 handfuls of water, pour them over his head, and he would wash his body 3 times. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And then he would wash his feet. Okay. And this is related by Bukhari and Muslim. This specific wording is from Sahih Muslim. So this is one of the hadiths. There's other hadiths describing the ghusl of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Amongst them, the hadith of Sayyidah Maymuna, also in Bukhari and Muslim. Inshallah, we will share with you. Just remind me of that. With proper translation, there's some real butchery, right? That's one of the things to be careful about, right? That janaba, for example, refers to a state. The default is a state that arises from intercourse. But one translation, I was tempted just to, this actually, the text of the Arabic here is taken from that translation. And this text is sound, but it says, the Prophet after sexual intercourse. The hadith doesn't say sexual, it says janaba. That's the state that's resultant from that one. So that's not, Sayyidah Aisha didn't say that. So that's like and then there's an adab that's lost. So the sunnahs of ghusl, right, are what was described. There's a few aspects to keep in mind, right? There are sunnahs before the ritual bath itself. And one should strive to observe them in that order. So what are the sunnahs before the ritual bath? They were listed as 5. Intention and washing one's hands. Then, that's 1 and 2. What are 3 and 4? Yeah, washing one's private parts, whether or not one used the toilet. Right? Okay. And then, what else? Washing. Yeah, washing away any filth that may be on the body. And that's only if it's there, not out of waswasa. You say, well, what if there's blood on my knee but I can't see it? Then it's not there. It's simple as that, right? Like, najasa is not like the sister of the Loch Ness monster, right? That maybe it's there, right? Like, if you can see it, it's there. If you can't, it's not. And possibilities are ignored. Yes, there could be an army of ghouls in my office. But unless you can see them, you assume there aren't and you enter, if you have my permission, safely, right? So that's as ridiculous. Someone said, I'm not going into my office. Why? Because there could be monsters in there. That's ridiculous. So why are you washing your knees? There may be filth on it. It's ridiculous. It's absurd, right? So just you won't do outwardly absurd things. Like on a sunny day, would you wear a raincoat on a sunny day? No. Why? Because it's not raining, right? So caution is only called for when evident it's raining. So you take the means of avoiding the rain, or when it's likely. There's a reason. It's cloudy. The forecast says there'll be rain. So you take the precaution, even if it's not raining right now. That's praiseworthy caution. But someone says, well, just in case it rains. But there's no clouds in the sky. There's no forecast of rain. You have no previous experience that in such situations it rains. Right? Imagine someone goes wearing a raincoat and with the hood on. Said, Tariq Bhai, why are you wearing that? He says, what if it rains? People think you're nuts. And it's religiously nuts to act upon these kinds of suppositions. And then what does one do? So we did 4. There's a 5th action before the acts of ghusl itself, which is make a complete wudu with its sunnahs. With its sunnahs. Then, yes, go ahead.
We're mentioning making a complete wudu with the sunnahs. I don't know if it was mentioned here, but you mentioned before that the feet are left for the head.
Yeah, so does one wash one's feet as part of the ghusl? They say you can. If you wish, you can wash your feet every time before ghusl. But they say that the ghusl of the Prophet ﷺ is related in 2 ways. Right? Which is, one is that after he did ghusl, he would separately wash his feet. And that is, and so how do you join? Some describe that he washed his feet, right, as part of, he did wudu, including washing his feet. Then he did a ghusl from head to toe completely, and that's it. And some mention that he washed his feet separately after. And the distinction is that if you're in a place where the water pools up, right, for whatever reason, right, the water gathers such that it covers your feet, then you will be needing to wash your feet separately at the end. In terms of appropriateness, technically, if the water is flowing, it's flowing, your feet got washed. But in terms of appropriateness, you would delay it till the end. But there's no harm in making a complete wudu, including washing the feet. And at the end, if the water pools up around your feet, then to wash your feet separately. But that's out of recommendation. It is not a requirement. Because that water that's pooled up, what's the assumption about that? What's the assumption regarding that? What? No, the assumption about that is purity. Can you see the filth? By default, can you see filth in water? I mean, unless you're delusional or have misgivings. No, you don't. Right? Number one, and of course, if you follow the sunnah is safety too, because if you washed away the filth already, there is no filth. So what filth would there be? Like renewed filth, yani? But even if there was filth, if you wash the filth away and there's flowing water, what happens with it? It went away, it's gone. You don't have to prove that it's gone. You assume it's gone. Right? You assume, yes?
If the water is not flowing, would it be considered used water and then cook the pot as well?
No, because if you're under the shower, let's assume we use a shower head. Does most of that water come in contact with your body? Are you sure that most of it comes in contact with your body? No. So the water on the ground, certainly from a shower, actually, and you could prove it statistically, but that's being a bit nerdy. Though, if someone avoids using a shower, there will be a reward, because even if you use, and if you plug your tub and apply some maths to it, someone can do it, I'll be really impressed. I don't care. It's a good exercise. Just try to estimate, just use your regular shower. Right? This is how you normally do it. And review, so you can actually Google, how do you measure volume? How much water do you use? It's shocking. The average, like the regular, like old school shower heads, if you take a 5-minute shower, use between 120 and 200 liters of water. It sounds unbelievable, but it's not. The regular washing up, you just wash your people like not a wudu, just regular people, just wash their hands, rinse their mouth, wash their face. It takes like 30 liters of water. The wudu of the Prophet ﷺ took less than half a liter of water. His ghusl took between 2.5 and 3 liters of water. And the sunnahs are his, right? So that's, so if someone can, or at least the parts where you're not actively using the water, turn off the shower. Like if you're soaping, etc.
So the sunnahs of ghusl here are described as before the ghusl, right?
Yeah.
Before the ritual bath. So saying, so this is not part of the ritual bath. So if one was to, after that, just wash the parts that water did not touch.
Well,
would
it's,
that be-
you know, it's not to make ghusl like, it's like the marriage ceremony, right? Like if you show up to the hub, why you show up? For Ubayd's marriage. Well, that's not his, right now is not his marriage, right? This is the precursor to the marriage itself is the nikah, right? Which is a subset of something larger, okay? So this is all, this is all from the acts of ghusl, but some lead up to it, and then you have the act itself, right? So is it of ghusl? Yes, because these are what precede the ghusl itself, and then you have the ghusl itself. He doesn't mention many things related to the sunnahs of the ritual bath, but there's a few points that are important. The first is to wash 3 complete times. If you put together the various hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, it's understood that that washing any limb is to wash it completely. And the command of ghusl relates to the whole body. So washing 3 times means 3 complete times. One washing is when you wash from head to toe once. That's one washing. Then you wash from head to toe a second time. That's the second washing. Washing from head to toe a third time, that's the third washing. It's not to wash each part of the body 3 times. Right? And that's why they say there's a principle that in ghusl, the entire body is as if one limb. And the command in the verse relates to your entirety, not to you as a sum of parts. So one washing is to wash from head to toe once. Rubbing is a sunnah in ghusl as it is a sunnah in wudu. So they mention a principle that ما يسن يعني سنن الوضوء هي سنن الغسل. The sunnahs of wudu are the sunnahs of ghusl. There's one noteworthy exception. There's one noteworthy exception during the ghusl itself. What would that? And it's not an emphasized sunnah, it relates to a recommended sunnah. There's one sunnah that would not, one recommended sunnah that would not normally apply in ghusl. What is that? We just said rubbing is a sunnah in wudu and sunnah in ghusl. Facing the qibla. Facing the qibla, what's the ruling of facing the qibla in wudu? It's recommended. In ghusl, if one is in a state of uncovering, then one avoids facing the qibla directly. Though if one is covered in ghusl, then one can face the qibla. And then beginning with the head is the stronger position. There are some narrations that mention that from which it's understood to begin with the shoulders. And there are some Hanafis who preferred beginning with the shoulders over beginning the head. Some Hanafis try to justify it, they try to explain away everything, that those lands are probably cold lands. Right? So you don't want to put cold water on your head, right? Or burning water on your head. Say, well, why do you want to burn your shoulders? But and some Hanafis lived in very cold lands, right? They're like the Tatars and the Bulghars and all these places. They had some very interesting discussions in the Hanafi books. Like their lands in the eastern lands. Like Islam went very far north into the former Soviet republics, right? And, so much so that some of these they're Muslims living in areas at that time where there was no sunset in summer. It was a real legal issue. There are Muslims living in what would now be Siberia, right? And north north enough that, and there's Muslims actually trading in what's now Scandinavia. We know that the Vikings had a lot of interactions with Muslims, and Muslims were going all over the place, right? And there's a big argument, especially amongst the Hanafis, as what do you do, and we'll see it when we come to the times of prayer. What do you do if you're in a place where there's no time of prayer? Because if the sun doesn't set, then there's no Maghrib, and therefore there's no Isha, and there's no Fajr. So can you just be a slacker and pray Dhuhr and Asr and that's it? No. Well, we'll see the ruling. If you're going there, consult, but if you're not, don't worry about it right now. But it had a lengthy legal argument about it. So, but the stronger opinion is to begin with the head. We mentioned the neglected sunnah of before washing the head to take some water and rub one's head. And from this subtlety that Sayyidah Aisha mentioned, they mentioned a broader principle is that in order to facilitate washing a limb, it can help to rub it with a wetted hand. Okay. So if you have dry skin, for example, or you have mild misgivings, so you're uncomfortable, did I wash completely? Take a wetted hand, rub the area, then the water will flow much more clearly over it, so you won't have doubts. Go ahead.
In the integral, we mentioned here washing whatever is possible without undue difficulty or hardship. Normally, is there any undue difficulty, like something considered undue?
So undue difficulty, for example, they say مثل ثقب انضم. For example, a hole, like for example, if a brother used to have earrings, now he no longer wears earrings, so he has a hole but it's kind of closed on itself. Do you have to stick like a twig into that hole to open it up to make sure water reaches? No. Right? If you have a wound, you have a scab on a wound, do you have to rip the scab off? No. Right? Or sometimes you have a scab that's kind of like dangling. Do you have to stick water inside because theoretically, you could, if it's not completely covering, right, do you have to uncover it and get the water? Because the area under it is partially exposed, right? The scab can't make up its mind. The scab has waswasa. Should I stay on or get off? So, do you have to get water underneath it? No, you don't, right? And so on, right? Other things in which there's hardship in getting water through to it, which is why one obvious thing, it is theoretically possible to wash the inside of the eyelids, but that's considered to have hardship or harm in regularly washing your eyelids. Other areas that are healing, for example, right, where washing would cause harm. Say, إن الله لا يستحي من الحق. There's لا حياء في الدين. If someone is uncircumcised, right, then the foreskin, right, if one is able to uncover it without difficulty, then one must wash the area that it covers. But if there is hardship in uncovering it, then it would be excused. And the scholars discuss the foreskin extensively because it gets tricky, apparently. So that's another area. So the criteria applies. When there's undue hardship or harm, it's excused. When there isn't, it's not. From undue hardship would also be considered. For example, if you are in a profession in which your skin gets stained with paint, for example, right? Then the amount whose removal entails hardship or harm, by removing it regularly, that would be excused. But if Tariq and Tariqa moved into their new house and they decide to paint the house and they got paint all over themselves, they have to remove it by default, right? Because that's like 1 day of, 1-2 days. So there you have to take extra means not to get paint on yourself. You have to take extra means to remove it.
If you're in the bath, is the water that's in the bath, is that impure?
No. The water that's in the bath is pure. Why would it be impure? Dirt is not filth. Let's say that we dunked Dave in some mud. Right? Is the mud filthy? Is the mud najis? No. You could pray in that. You could get up, muddy man, and say Allahu Akbar and pray. It can be as muddy as you want. Right? That's a common misconception, right? Of many people, that there's a difference between being ritually pure and being clean. So they ask the trick: can you be dirty? Can you pray when you're dirty? And you can be as dirty as you want. I mean, it's better to be clean, but it's not a requirement. Go ahead. Yeah. There's a neglected, recommended sunnah, and some refer to as an adab, of covering even in ghusl. Right? And one of the amazing, there's a neglected, it's not a sunnah, but it's a neglected matter from the sunnah, that the Prophet ﷺ would often take a shower with his wives, like Sayyidah Aisha mentioned that she often took a shower with him. But yet, she said, I never saw his private parts and he never saw mine. Okay? So there's this beautiful balance of this intimacy, yet with this beautiful guardedness and restraint. But the guardedness and restraint is not one of distance, but one of, it's expressed beautifully. Some people try to be, okay, I'm being cautious, religious, so they're like, withdraw. How is that expressed? By one of the things, by either having a wraparound, and they say here it would be minimally the private parts, or between navel and knee. There's any way that fulfills it. Someone could, because you've already washed the private parts, etc. Whether you cover it wearing an underwear, whether you do it, you have some kind of wraparound that you leave afterwards to dry, etc. There's many different ways. And this, of course, a neglected, the sense of haya in general is something that was cultivated, that was instilled by the Prophet ﷺ in the companions. And you see many manifestations of it in the ummah, right? That it's very common in many traditional cultures that even if you're wearing trousers, for example, like a sirwal, under a thobe, this for men. People always talk about, just to highlight an adab, in many cultures, very common. I know I mentioned particular Shaykh types, but one of the reasons I kind of like, if the Shaykhs come, I try to be like, avid to have them stay. You learn from them. You learn from, not just from older people, but even your peers, because they're people who care to act upon knowledge. But it's very common that even if they're wearing a thobe, and they're wearing like thobe pants underneath it, whenever possible, they'd tie an izar around themselves. Why? Out of modesty. Because when you're walking around, even wearing a full thobe, you have to be modestly covered. There's no requirement of it or emphasis, but it's out of a sense of adab. You see, it's very common that if you've seen people of learning, when they sit, very often they'll put their shawl or scarf or whatever on their thigh area. Why? There's no obligation. It's not haram or makruh or whatever, but it's a sense of haya, and that's an important value in the deen. And the Sahaba asked the Prophet ﷺ about what about being naked when we're alone? And the Prophet said, Allah أحق أن يستحى منه من الناس. Allah is more deserving of one's sense of shyness than people are. So this is an adab. There's no direct expectation that you do it. It's not listed as a central, it's not an emphasized sunnah of ghusl. It's not a specifically recommended sunnah, but is understood from the sunnah and implemented. There's reward in it and there's wisdom and benefit in it. There's other matters like this. Sometimes spouses ask, well, can we be fully uncovered in our marital relation? Yes, you can. There's nothing religiously disliked about it, in privacy. But what is the superior way? So we would not say it's not legally specifically recommended, but it is from the sunnah and an adab to cover. Now someone's not so aware, you can be as naked as you want if you're, but there's superior. And some people question saying that Abdullah ibn Abbas, well, I said based on all of there's nothing wrong with being fully uncovered, but there's a sense of what is superior. What are other issues that arise with respect to ghusl? There's at least 3 obvious major issues related to the actions of ghusl. 2 that arise with respect to women. I forget the third, actually. Okay, 2 that arise with respect to women. And just of the actions of ghusl itself.
Getting hair or getting water to the roots of the hair.
No, that's you're mentioning like a detail. But what's the issue? The first issue is, what about women's hair? Do women have to wash their hair completely in ghusl? So if it's braided, then they don't. If a woman's hair is braided, which means it is tied, it does not have to be called a quote unquote braid. If it is tied, it does not have to be. The hair does not have to be washed. Rather, one just has to get water to the roots of the hair. And the hair itself, even its outward, does not have to be washed. Go ahead.
Is it based on the length of the hair?
No. If someone has, and I'm not commenting on the legal ruling of shortening hair right now, that's a separate matter, but if someone has short hair and if they tie up the hair, if a woman ties up her hair, the ruling applies. The ruling is attached to tying together the hair. It doesn't have to be tied in one braid or 2. Okay. Braided hair is an exemption for women, not for men. So if a man has braided hair, the default is that the dispensation does not apply. There are other positions that do exist, but the default is that the dispensation does not apply for men. Any other questions? Does it have to do with the actions of ghusl? No. So. Yeah, the hair can be braided after the fact, right? So, a woman normally wears her hair loose or wears it loose at home. Then she requires to make ghusl after. She can tie her hair and make ghusl, right? Even right before. It's not like the khuf or something, right? It doesn't have to be tied like you have to, how hard to have to. Nothing like that applies. There's also one other ruling related to women, which is earrings, right? Earrings, that it's sufficient one's wearing the earring, to just move the earring slightly, and you can assume that the water reached, and that's it. If one takes off one's earrings, then what's proper is just to rub that area once, just to ensure. But the nature of water is flow, so the assumption is that the water reached, but just the proper act would be just to, if one's wearing an earring, to move it a little. If not, then just to rub the area once, and that's sufficient. Hard to reach places, rubbing takes care of that, right? Do you have to be certain that water reached your entire back? You have to be certain that water reached your entire back. Can you be certain? Who would say it's not possible? It's not practically possible to be certain. Right? Rather, you go with the default. If you make water flow over your back, what do you assume? That the water reached your back. You rub once, and the rubbing is not a requirement. That just, you're going above and beyond, right? Right? But you rub and you take care. They say you pay attention to the nooks and crannies, your belly button, behind your knees, etc. But even if you didn't, water flowed down your body, so you assume that it reached all these places, right? Any other questions?
Shaykh, jumping back to the washing of the hair for men. If you have like African hair, a lot of brothers that wear their hair in cornrows get concerned that like maybe they shouldn't wear their hair in cornrows then.
Yeah, the default in the Hanafi school is that if a man braids his hair, then a man has to wash his entire hair. So if the hair is tied, then it has to be tied in a way that the water can reach all the hair. And it's not a new thing. Many mountain peoples, amongst them, they mentioned the Atarak and the Akrad and the Alawis, right? Sunni Alawis, I think, because and others, the Turks and the Kurds and others, mountain peoples at that time, would tie up their hair. So they said the stronger position is that the dispensation does not apply. There are other opinions that concede it, which can, especially if someone is a recent convert, for example, etc. And they said particularly if this is from the habit of the people, there are some other opinions. So one doesn't hasten to give fatwa to people on such matters. That just tells them to consult someone regarding. And there's leeway, including in other schools as well.
So for the three complete washings, would that include the mouth? So would you have to rinse your mouth 3 times?
No. Like the mouth and nose, where are they taken care of with respect to the ghusl? In the wudu that you do in the ghusl. Right? You've done that already, so you don't have to do it as part of the outer body. Good? Yeah. So if one does the wudu just with the obligatory acts, you've done this. You've done the sunnah, but not completely. You've done the sunnah there, but not completely. It's better than omitting the wudu before the ghusl fully, but the more complete. Because some descriptions mention that he made wudu like his wudu for the prayer. Right? Which it's his sunnah. He did means with the sunnahs.
Is something prevented a small portion of the body to not get wet during wudu? Some barrier, and after the fact we found out that it prevented with some glue or some tape or something. Would it suffice to just take that off and wash it, or would that?
Yeah. If you omit some part of the ghusl, right? You didn't wash something, or there was a barrier. You forgot that you tied duct tape over your finger because you decided, you noticed Nadir Khan started putting duct tape on his fingers. I don't know if it's for style or to be dramatic or for a good reason, but you put duct tape on your finger too. Right? So who's he to put duct tape on his finger? So you put duct tape on your finger. And you make ghusl, then you realize your little pinky has duct tape on it. Now, would water reach through duct tape properly tied around your finger? No. Let's assume it doesn't. Right? So all you have to do is take off the duct tape and wash the area. And this is assuming there's no reason for the duct tape to be like you cut yourself or dislocated or something. Okay, go ahead.
If during the ghusl, a small amount of impurity, for example, like madi or something, is continuously coming out throughout the ghusl, is it invalidated?
So if something that invalidates wudu happens during the ghusl, it doesn't invalidate the ghusl, but all it requires is wudu after. Of course, if it's by your choice, right, it's highly inappropriate. It's an act. It's an act of worship, right? So I've been asked, and sorry, this is, like, is it permitted to urinate while making ghusl? Now, urinating would not invalidate the lifting of major ritual impurity. Right? But if you urinated and you didn't wash your whole body after it, then you'd have to make wudu. But it's inappropriate on several counts. One, urinating during an act of worship. Right? Number two, especially if you're standing, there's inappropriateness of urinating while standing. Number three, the spreading of filth is blameworthy. If there's water around, it's bad news at many fronts. So what if one is overcome by the urge to relieve oneself while taking a ghusl? The right thing to do is to interrupt one's ghusl, use the toilet, and start over. And that's the proper thing to do. Go ahead.
Shaykh, about washing. If you have a disability or an injury that limits your mobility, is the integral still fulfilled if someone assists you, like washes you?
If it happens, it happens, right? So let's say some random person called Bilal needs to make ghusl. But he's being lazy. He said, I can't pray Dhuhr with you guys because I need to make ghusl. So what you do, you tie him up in a chair and you grab Taymur and Amr and you bring a bucket of water and you pour it over him. Right? And Amr decides to take a big syringe and stream water in his mouth and to syringe his nose. So you make sure water gets his mouth and nose as well. Right? And he says, and I'll rub his nose for him. So you do a ghusl, you ghusl him. It's valid. Because is intention a requirement? No. You dunk someone in a lake. They have ghusl now. Right? As long as water reaches their mouth and nose. Right? So if there's someone there to assist one, someone has disabilities. They're not able to make ghusl on their own. If there's someone to assist them, they can seek that assistance, but are they obligated to? No, they're not. They say, Imam Abu Hanifa had a principle that a person is only able with their own ability. So if you're only able to do an action with the ability of another, Imam Abu Hanifa applied it broadly. You're not considered able. So if you require ghusl, you can't make ghusl on your own, you could make tayammum. But if they're a person who's expected to assist you or serve you, then Abu Hanifa said then it'd be good to seek their assistance. His companion said you would have to seek their assistance. When is ghusl obligatory and when is it sunnah? There's another question? So you rinse the mouth, but without exaggerating. So exaggeration is recommended in wudu and recommended in ghusl. So if you take water and you swirl it around your mouth, water reaches the mouth. It's recommended to tilt one's head back to let some water reach to make sure water reaches the back of the throat, such as by gargling or making the gargling motion, right? Those are all recommended to clearly fulfill that. In fasting, one doesn't do those extra things. So one just swirls water around the mouth, but without tilting one's head back, without gargling, etc., and that's it. And the simple thing to do is to swirl water around one's mouth while leaning forward, by doing the opposite. So that way, gravity will ensure that if you lean forward, your mouth is at a drastical angle and there's no way it'll go down your throat. Right? When is ghusl obligatory? Ghusl is obligatory if one of four things happen. The exiting of ejaculate that left its origin with desire, its place of origin with desire. The second, this is whether the first is the exiting of ejaculate is whether it's through intercourse or otherwise. The second is intercourse, actual intercourse, whether it's with ejaculation or not. And the third and fourth are the end of menstruation and the end of postnatal bleeding. And we'll be looking at the fiqh related to those 2 classes from now. Number 3 and 4. So the first of these is ejaculation. So the exiting of ejaculate that left its place of origin with desire. So the ruling is established when the ejaculate left its place of origin with desire. So when is desire a condition? When the ejaculate left its resting place, right? But if it left its resting place, like where is it going to go? It's going to come out. The ruling is manifest when it comes out. Right? That's when ghusl would be required. Desire is not required at the time of exit. Okay? So someone experienced the gushing of ejaculate, but nothing came out. But a little while later, there it is, the ruling is required. Even it came out later. Right? The only exception to that is that if it's delayed in coming out, right? Some of it could have meandered and taken the scenic route, and hours later, or a long time later, it comes out. Now that is given an exception because that could be a hardship. If someone needs to make ghusl, they had a wet dream, they wake up, they make ghusl, and they go to work, and then something came out, like an hour after waking, that would be a hardship. Right? So that's an excuse, and we'll look at that. So the ruling is established if, when the ejaculate leaves its place of origin, right, with desire. Right? So one, quote unquote, experiences an orgasm. But the ruling is manifest, we say ghusl is required when ejaculate exits the body. Right? So it must exit for the ruling to be manifest. Desire is a condition to establish the ruling. The desire can be actual or effective. Right? It can be actual or effective. Effective, whether it be there was a wet dream, but one doesn't remember experiencing desire, considered effective. Or someone in marital relations there was ejaculation, but I didn't feel anything. You just slap them on the back of the head and say, I don't believe you. Right? That's considered strange. What would be accepted, where would you say that there's no desire actual or effective? It is highly rare, but possible. Someone picks up something heavy and they experience ejaculation. And they felt, and no, people typically don't feel great desire by lifting something heavy. Okay? So that would be the exception. But ghusl would be good there because in some schools, like in the Shafi'i school, that would still appear to require ghusl. So there's difference of opinion on that. So that's the desire, actual or effective. Are you stretching or raising your hands? Okay, that's okay. Full right to stretch. Okay. Any questions here?
So just to clarify, someone who has no desire and it's like a health problem that just comes out or something, then it's not also not
No, it's not have to. No, so if it comes out without, even if it comes out unusually, so there's ejaculation as opposed to emission. Emission, like which is that would be considered madhi, pre-ejaculate, right? But it comes out, with in spurts. That's a sign of. Then, if it's for none of the normal reasons, of experiencing desire, then if someone's walking or it's highly unusual, then if that would be a case of confusion, so the advice there would be consult. But if it's for not any situation where the normal assumption be that desire should have been experienced, right? Then ghusl is not required. So related to that is the issue of wet dreams, right? Whether one remembers something or not, then ghusl is required if one is sure, one sees ejaculate. Right? One sees ejaculate. If one remembers a wet dream but there's no evidence of it, then it does not apply. If unsure, one is don't be unsure. Just avoid unsure. Just say, did something come out? Yes, may ghusl. No, don't. That's it. That simplifies it. Otherwise, there's dozens of possibilities. They divide it down into 24 different theoretical possibilities, depending on what's the nature of your doubt, because this is an area where caution is required. So the simple way is decisiveness. Did something come out? Yes. Make ghusl. No, don't. Stay safe. Don't say, I don't know. If you don't know, then go and consult with someone who knows, because there's 24 different cases. Nur al-Ilah mentions a good number of those cases. Because what you're unsure of could be the possibility. Is it many or madhi? If your hesitation is it ejaculate or pre-ejaculate? Or is it wadi? Or is it just this cloudy discharge that men get? Or and you could be unsure between two things or between three things, and you could complicate it further. Said, if someone's really confused and they say, well, it could be urine, could be vaginal discharge, all these possibilities. So you could really complicate it. So the basic lesson in your legal life is do not be of the unsure. Right? And if you're unsure, be merciful. إِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعَيِّ أَسْوَلُ. The cure for confusion is just to ask. Just to ask. And not to hesitate, even if it's embarrassing. But is it, and one of the women of the Ansar asked the Prophet ﷺ, does a woman experience something like that? And she asked the question, another woman of the Ansar actually asked the question explicitly, that if a woman experiences in her sleep what a man experiences, does she require ghusl? So two of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ stared at her. This is in front of men and women. says, فَضَحْتِ النِّسَاء, you have shamed womanhood. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ answered the question and detailed it out, and he didn't object. So Sayyidah Aisha, who was one of the objectors, she commented after, may Allah have mercy on the women of the Ansar. لم يمنعهن الحياء من التفقه في الدين. Their modesty did not prevent them from gaining understanding of religion. Sometimes one of the ways to that, someone embarrassed to ask a direct question, you can send it as send it in writing. You can ask indirectly, etc. Sayyidina Ali was embarrassed to ask the Prophet. He asked another companion, who took another companion with him, and the other companion asked. So if you're unsure, if you think that it is pre-ejaculate, then the caution is, if your doubt is it pre-ejaculate rather than ejaculate, then you have to make ghusl. Because you could just be, that's a place of necessary caution. But if you simply remember a dream of a sexual nature, then ghusl is not required. If you remember but you don't see anything, and if you have mere doubts, ignore. Right? The advice is use your judgment. Use your judgment. Right? If you're keen to investigate this matter, the practical advice is be decisive. Is this many or is it not many? Is it ejaculate or not? If it is, and just give yourself yes or no. If you can make that judgment, you don't have to get into the ocean of possibilities. If you like legal nuance, then jump into it. And if you want to diagram it, I'm at your service. Intercourse, and they define intercourse thoroughly, right? And if you want a more detailed description of what is intercourse, Nur al-Ilah defines it in detail. Now some people get shocked, right? They say but the thing is, the role of the faqih is to tell you what the ruling is. And there are possibilities, right? There are possibilities. And the jurist's responsibility is not to highlight what is good and bad and right and wrong, as jurist. Right? In another role, and some things are obvious, and the obvious you don't need to tell them. So they even say, Islamic law countenances intercourse with minors. No, it doesn't. It mentions the legal ruling, that if this happens, this is the ruling. Why? Because sadly, there are people who may do such things. So what's the ruling? This is the ruling. What if, and even worse, they mention that what if one of the things that does not require ghusl is intercourse with an animal. Now it's obvious. Someone does that, you don't need to tell someone that this is sinful, and it's not just sinful, it's a major sin. There's hadiths. Someone does, this is the ruling. And there are sick people out there. Someone did something like that, they come, I want to repent. What's the ruling? This is the ruling. Assalamu alaikum, next question. Okay. So just be, that's just the nature of law. Like you go read what a judge makes judgments on all kinds of cases. There's all kinds of absurd cases. What's the ruling? There's the rulings. Next case. Right? Judges aren't bound there to give you, to give a sermon. Right? So, actual penetration requires ghusl. Anything less than that does not require ghusl. But it may require wudu. Right? It would require wudu. Right? Unless ejaculation takes place, in which case it would require ghusl. And the end of menstruation and postnatal bleeding. Right. And there's an issue, which is that if someone enters Islam in a state of ritual purity, do they require ghusl or not? Right. So broadly, they said there's two rulings. If one had experienced any of the causes that require ghusl before Islam, what we'll do, inshallah, is think about this. And we'll be open with this question. If someone enters Islam, is it obligatory for them to make ghusl? Is it obligatory for them to make ghusl? Of course, the obvious thing is, ghusl is not a requirement for entering Islam. Right? Actually, some of the Shafi'is say it would be kufr. Someone says, I want to become Muslim, say, go make ghusl. That delaying someone's Islam would be kufr. Okay? So you can't do that. If you're giving a khutbah, someone says, not just I want to become Muslim. Someone says, I'm interested in Islam. You're obligated to interrupt your khutbah and to present Islam to them, and you cannot delay. And I got told off with a good friend of mine. I actually just talked to him before this class, Abdurrahman Malik, because a friend of ours on campus wanted to become Muslim. We're like two brown guys, we're like, white dude wants to become Muslim. What do we do? So we called Shaykh Abdullah Hakim quick. Shaykh Abdullah, it was Ramadan too. What do we do? He's like, he was really nice about it, but he was amazed. You brothers didn't give him the shahada? I said, no. He said, you got to fear Allah. There's people who said this is kufr. I'm not saying it's kufr, but he says, give him the shahada. I said, we don't know how. He said, you don't know the shahada? I said, we do. I said, what if we give it wrong? He says, give it. I said, can you give it? He said, and so in the end we took him to, but poor guy, the first thing he did as a Muslim was pray 20 rak'ahs at Jami Mosque. And we kind of felt, we were like slacker students at that time. Our Taraweeh used to be pray 2 or 4 rak'ahs and then have a second dinner and then finish Taraweeh at a faster pace, usually. We had quote unquote studies. But mashallah, the brother prayed all 20 rak'ahs before he declared his shahada, because we were scared to give it to him. But that's wrong, right? So if someone enters Islam in a state of major ritual impurity, right, is it a legal obligation for them to make ghusl? Is it good to make ghusl? No one would say no, right? But when is it obligatory? When it's recommended. So do research that, and we'll take that to begin. When is ghusl sunnah? There's 4 occasions when ghusl is sunnah. For the Friday prayer, for the 2 Eid prayers, for entering into the ihram, when you're going for Hajj or Umrah, and at Arafah, on the day of Arafah, for the pilgrim, not for others. Right? And the recommended situations are many. Okay. So if we look at the emphasized sunnahs, the first issue is ghusl with respect to Friday and Eid prayers is for the prayer, for the one who will be praying it. It is an emphasized sunnah. It is not a sunnah for the person, for the day, but it is recommended. Right? It is recommended. So let's say you're a traveler. It's Friday. You won't be able to, or you won't be praying Salatul Jumu'ah. And as a traveler, you're not obligated to. Then, it's not sunnah for you to make ghusl. It's not sunnah, meaning it's not an emphasized sunnah for you to make ghusl. But it would be recommended though. Let's say you're a sister, and is Friday prayer obligatory for sisters? No. If you're going for Jumu'ah, then it's an emphasized sunnah for you to make ghusl. Though if you don't, it's still better to go if you want to than not to go. But let's say you're not going to Jumu'ah. Is it sunnah for you to make ghusl on Fridays? That's tricky. When the fuqaha say sunnah, what do they mean? Yeah. Meaning an emphasized sunnah. A sunnah you're expected to do, such that leaving it will be blameworthy. So you have to be clear, are they talking about an emphasized sunnah or a recommended sunnah? So it's not an emphasized sunnah, but it would remain recommended. For Friday, likewise for the 2 Eid prayers. Someone who's not going for Eid prayer, whether they're unwell or just, women are not, it's not wajib for women to go for Eid. If they wish to, they may. But let's say they're not going for whatever reason, then it remains recommended. One's rewarded for it. Right? That's one issue. The other issue is that for the Friday prayer and the Eid prayer, the optimal is to attend the prayer in a state of ritual purity that is the ghusl. That's the optimal. But if not facilitated, then one does not lose the reward of the ghusl that one did. Right? So you go to work on Fridays, you make ghusl at home, and then you head off to Friday prayer, and you lost wudu. You don't vitiate the reward of the Friday ghusl. You're rewarded for the action and the intention. But and when unable to make ghusl again, one would not lose any reward. Rather, one would be rewarded further for the wudu one made. But if one can, the superior thing is to go to Friday prayer with a state of purity that is one's ghusl. And a neglect, and we'll look at the sunnahs of Friday. They're good to review because Friday comes every week, right? And people neglect, there's many sunnahs and many adab related to Friday, so one should not neglect them. Any questions here related to this? Go ahead. Yeah. There is not, during menstruation, there is no specific recommendation for ghusl, but if one wishes to make ghusl for cleanliness, then that's praiseworthy. And if one wants to combine that today is a virtuous day, Friday, then one would be rewarded for that intention. When is it recommended? The author mentioned just a few situations that is recommended for entering Mecca and for entering Medina. And separate from entering Medina, it's recommended to make ghusl for visiting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? But there are many other situations where ghusl would be recommended. Amongst them is repenting from a major sin, for example. That's one of the very important ones, right? Or when you fell into major wrongdoing, etc., it's a good thing to make ghusl. So in Nur al-Idah, many circumstances in which it's recommended to make ghusl are mentioned. Ghusl is not required for anything else besides the four things that were mentioned. Nothing else. And some of them mentioned are a bit shocking. So they say, what if you insert a finger? You can stick your finger anywhere in your body and it won't affect the validity of your ghusl. Right? Don't, but, right? Or the like of it. You stuck something else elsewhere, don't, but it would not require ghusl. Right? And other matters which we won't read out. Right? Unless ejaculation takes place. Right? And we mentioned the legal context of that. The role of the jurist is to mention these are the rulings. The obvious is obvious. Right? It's wrong, it's a major sin, etc. Right? So that's why they mention it. But the reason we mention that sometimes people who are either confused and they open the books of our deen, there's some things that are prescriptive. Right? That what should you do? Some types of rulings are prescriptive. They tell you this is what you should do. On Fridays, this is what you should do. That's prescriptive religious teachings. Right? What should you do? There's others that are descriptive. That if you do this, this is the ruling. Or this is, and what's the ruling? It's what is consequent to what you have done. And the jurist looks at what is outwardly consequent. So someone goes to the judge and complains, Your Honor, my husband curses me daily. The judge would say, next case please. Why? Because is there any legal implication to one person cursing another in itself? What's the judge going to do? Right? There's some things that, that's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like that doesn't, they say لا يدخل تحت القضاء. It doesn't enter into, into court law, right? So, because it's not quantifiable. Like what's, like A curse B, like what do you do? So and so hurt my feelings. Like, come on, like what's a, so this is, one has to be aware of it. Some rulings as well, so there's prescriptive ruling, which is what must you do or what should you do, what can you do. Others are descriptive, that if you do this, then this is the consequence. And sometimes they're descriptive, not just because that in case you do this, but sometimes because it's likely that it will happen. Like it or not, it is likely that it will happen. As unfortunate as it may be. So it'll describe what the limit is. It'll describe what the limit is because it's likely to happen. So it's out of mercy to say, this is the limit. Do not transgress that limit because beyond that will be, has clear consequences. Now, one example of the many regarding that is what they call the vexing verse. Right? What's the vexing verse? 4:34. So Surah 4, verse 34 is, regarding, and some people get dramatic. Don't listen to the confused. That, some person declared, just say no to the Quran. You're going to become a kafir, right? I mean, that's a bit serious. That just described that the ruling there regarding hitting is not a prescriptive ruling, it is a descriptive ruling. Right? Why? It's a reality. Just look at the statistics. Men are given to aggression. It's wrong, but this is a reality that exists. So if it happens, this is the absolute. If you go beyond that, it has worldly implications, not only next worldly implications. Anything beyond that is criminal, not just, it's a criminal wrong, not just a moral wrong. Right? So, and that's a separate matter, but that's just one example of the difference between something that's prescriptive and descriptive. And the fuqaha, they'll tell you, this happened, do this. Right? Someone says, I inserted whatever, wherever, what's the ruling? Said, did ejaculation take place? No ghusl required. Now, if you're in an age of confusion and unawareness, they'll mention, by the way, that's haram, etc. But that's not their role as a jurist. Which is also sometimes people get confused. When you go to ask a question, know what you're seeking. Because, sometimes fuqaha behave like fuqaha. Because that's what they are. You go to a fatwa council, you're asking a fatwa. You're not asking for religious advice. But sometimes people go seeking counseling from a fatwa council. Now, there needs to be some context, some facilitative interfaces in our community for that. But a woman goes, say, I've been abused. Say, can you prove it? No, we can't. We can't annul the marriage just based on the claim. Right? And someone gets very upset. Now, if you go to the same person seeking counseling, you have a different answer. You go seeking a religious guidance, you get a separate answer. You go seeking a fatwa, you get a different answer. You go to them seeking adjudication, tahkeem, you get a different ruling. So the same person could give you 4 different religious answers depending on how you're going to them. Now, we need to invest sufficiently in our community to provide the facilitative interfaces so people know where to take their question, right? You have to have like informational buckets that this is what you're coming with. Don't take this is not something to take to the council of scholars, because they're, nor to the mufti, nor here. This, you take that to the counselor. Right? This is not counseling. You need to seek annulment here. Like, so go over there, right? And some, and be careful when people make claims that, well, we went to some scholar and they gave me an awful answer. Right? Maybe the answer was sound, but was not understood. Right? So we have this distance. Someone goes and says, I'm outraged. The scholar told me be patient. But scholar, assume that you understand what is patience. Now maybe they shouldn't have assumed this. Right? But maybe the context they come from, people understand what is patience. To be strong on what is pleasing to Allah. And so that's a context one should be aware of. Any questions here? Go ahead.
How exactly is a judicial verdict different from a fatwa?
How exactly is a judicial verdict?
I mean, you like differentiate.
Yeah. No, a court ruling is so let's say we're going to go overboard 10 minutes. So just a judicial rule. So let's say there is a case of, let's say Zubaydah hit Zubair with the frying pan. Okay, you go to court. The judge, there's a threshold of physical harm that is criminal. That is criminally punishable. So you say, okay, do you have medical evidence that this has left you lasting harm, etc.? No. Okay. You don't have a case. Case dismissed. The qadi has no duty to tell you what's right and wrong. Right? The qadi judges by the outward. Right? And there's a threshold, because minor squabbles don't enter into legal verdicts. Right? Like even in the courts, you have like the decision between regular court and small claims court and other things that are meant to be settled between the two parties, right? Like we have that here in the Canadian criminal system too, right? So not everything is taken to court. Some things is the small claims court, which is much faster, and some things aren't admitted to court. Right? So there's a threshold in different areas related to that, which does not mean the action is right. The same thing, Zubaydah hit Zubair, they go to seek a fatwa. So the qadi would dismiss the case, say that you have no case. But Zubair, like, my head hurts. The qadi, if the Zubair keeps complaining, he'd throw him out. It's like, sorry, there are other people whose rights have to be heard. Right? If you go seeking a fatwa, the mufti would tell you that if this is the case, then that was sinful. That's the fatwa. If you go seeking religious advice, the advisor might not even tell you what the legal ruling is. They might just tell you, don't fight. And if Zubair asks it, don't get her upset. Right? So it depends. If you want to reconcile, the counselor don't give religious advice. They'll see how they can actually fix things. The religious scholar responsibility is not the counsel. They'll just give you religious advice. Don't fight. Don't get her angry. Don't this and that. Right? They just give you advice. The counselor, they're like, so these are different functions. And the Prophet ﷺ operated at these and other religious levels. Right? We're just briefly going to look at some principles related to purity, and we'll just state them without going into extended explanation. Many of these we've mentioned before. The first is that purification is based on ease. Right? Purification is based on ease. Right? And we looked at the verses that highlight that, and it's highlighted in the verse of purification. Surah 5, verse 6. Second, purity is assumed regarding things. Water is dirty. What do you assume? It's pure. Your clothes are dirty. The assumption about anything is that purity is assumed. Related to that, there's a broad principle. الأصل في الأشياء بمنزلة اليقين. The initial assumption regarding anything is your operational certainty. So what's the initial assumption regarding everything besides filth? Is that it is not filthy. And that's your operational certainty. Related to that, we have some principles. The first of which is that certainty is not lifted by doubts, right? Nor by possibilities, right? So the initial assumption regarding something is your operational certainty. Certainty is not lifted by doubts and possibilities. I may well not have wiped my head. You assume validity. So you assume that you did, you ignore doubts. Certainty is only lifted by certainty. When certainty is not possible, one resorts to reasoned judgment. When certainty is not possible, one resorts to reasoned judgment. Did water get to the middle of my back? How could you be certain? It's reasoned judgment. You've made water flow over the back, right? And with the assumption that yes, it did. Right? Can you be certain whether this is more than 5 grams of filth? No. What are you going to do? Weigh it? No. You use reasoned judgment. Okay? When certainty isn't reason, you can even add reasonably possible, right? Without hardship, right? You exercise a reasoned judgment. Allah has not placed any hardship for you in religion. But reasoned judgment requires a basis, right? Then there's some principles related to caution. Any questions here regarding certainty and doubt? So the assumption about something is your operational certainty, is akin to your operational certainty. الأصل في الأشياء بمنزلة اليقين العملي. Right? واليقين لا يزول بالشك. Certainty is not lifted by doubts. إنما يزول اليقين باليقين. Certainty is only lifted by certainty. Right? So when it comes to purity, if you've made wudu, what's your operational assumption? That it's valid and that you have wudu. Then you doubt, maybe I lost my wudu. I get gas. What do you do with those doubts? I may have passed wind while walking up the hill. What do you do? Yeah, the right thing to do would be to ignore doubts. Certainty is not lifted by doubts. Right? Especially in matters like purification that are meant based on ease. Caution is recommended. And with purity, you say, well, purity is based on ease, but caution is recommended. But what is caution? Okay. Right? They say caution requires knowledge. Right? Right? To know how to express one's caution. And what is the definition of caution? The 10th principle is, caution is doing that which is more likely to be more pleasing to Allah. And that requires knowledge. How can you know what's pleasing to Allah unless you have a means of knowing that this is what's pleasing to Allah? And one should know that يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرِ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرِ. Allah wishes ease for you, and He does not wish hardship for you. This is one of the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that in the Quran. Right? So one exercises caution, but caution does not just automatically do what's stricter. Rather, do what is right and more right. Right? That is, which requires knowledge. So the basis of caution is to act on what is clearly better. It's clarity. Right? To do what's clearly better. Right? Right? So you do what's obligatory and sunnah as detailed by the scholars. You want to go beyond that, be more cautious, do what is recommended. Do what are the adab. Avoid what is disliked, improper, etc. And then something's unclear, consult. Caution is aided by company. You want to be cautious? Keep the company of people who are cautious in matters of deen. اتبع سبيل من أناب إلي. Follow the path of those who have turned to me penitently. Right? Otherwise, one is simply making religion difficult for oneself. Then one gets misgivings. So, waswasa, misgivings are from the shaitan. From the shaitan. That's the origin of misgivings. Right? Waswasa is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has commanded us to seek refuge from the whisperer, from the slinking whisperer, and from his whispering. So listening to waswasa is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not from caution. So saying, oh, maybe I didn't wipe my head. Going back and making wudu again, what you just did was displeasing to Allah. Why? Because you listened to waswasa. Right? That's listening. That's following on the footsteps of the shaitan. And that's not religious caution. Waswasa goes against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? And furthermore, waswasa is an innovation, it's a bid'ah, and it results in excess. Because you ended up using unnecessary water. You use water in a manner that wasn't called for. So that's waste. You can, if you have waswasa with respect to public rights, you may be committing sin. They say if you have waswasa, don't make wudu in the masjid. Because that's public. That's water funded by public money. So don't use it. Right? Waswasa imposes hardship on other people. Right? So it has many degrees of harm. So it is to be. So what's the adab with waswasa is to ignore it. Is to ignore it and not to pay attention to it. Okay? And then they say, الاحتياط لصاحب الوسوسة في ترك الاحتياط. Caution for the person with waswasa, with misgivings, is in leaving caution. Do what is prescribed, no more and no less. And if you find confusion in that, consult. Consult. You're confused about something, and anytime you're doing something that is confusing you, that you're finding difficult or overwhelming, don't try to figure it out. Ask someone worthy of asking, and don't stay in confusion. So that's what we wanted to close with, of some of the principles related to, to doubts and misgivings and certainty. And many of these we mentioned before, but these reiterate what we've taken. Next class we'll be looking at dry ablution and wiping over foot gear. Inshallah, so prepare for those. Any quick questions related to this before we close?
Shaykh, in the case of the ghusl that's fard, the second case where there's a mention of a living human being whose body is desirable, is the desirable treated as on an individual case-by-case basis?
No, they mention criteria.
Their criteria?
Yeah. They say desirable would be customary considered desirable. So it's not, there's an age criterion for that, which they describe. I'm pretty sure it's there in Nurul Ilah. There's no upper limit to age, right? Whether for men or for women, with respect to that. But there's a minimal age. And the sign of someone, so it's not a matter of, there's no aesthetic element to it. And again, this is a descriptive ruling, not a prescriptive ruling. It's not telling you who can or should you have relations with, but rather, if it happens, what is the ruling, right? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه